Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast Show. You're listening to the first and only podcast dedicated to the business of pharmacy. You can find all of our episodes at pharmacypodcast.com.
This is Kyle Lomax with Southern Pharmacies, and you're listening to the Pharmacy Podcast.
Hey, Pharmacy Podcast Nation. This is Todd Urey, host and founder of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. Excited to be back in the seat interviewing pharmacy owners. I'm excited about today's interview. Southern Pharmacy is the new name for 6 pharmacies owned and operated by Kenny Lomax, Kyle Lomax, and daughter-in-law Kass Lomax, which is an exciting group of entrepreneurs, pharmacy owners, innovators of technology. Changed back in September of 2017 with this new brand, Southern Pharmacy. And this is a first time for Kyle on the network. Welcome to the Pharmacy Podcast, Kyle. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. So 6 locations, Southern Pharmacy. Tell us about your pharmacy, the evolution of it, the fact that you're now a micro chain, if you didn't know that that's what you're being called, and why you love this business so much.
I grew up in pharmacy. My father's been a pharmacist for over 40 years, and so it's been part of my life since I was born. We started out in a small rural town in Arkansas. Over the years, we've added different locations in rural Arkansas and expanded even again in the fall, adding our 6th location, another small rural town in Arkansas. So it's been in my blood since I was born, and I'm happy to be a part of the community pharmacy community.
So when you're a pharmacy owner and you experience so many different challenges that are very specific to being a pharmacy owner, you're dealing with technology, employee programs, benefits, taxes, for goodness sakes, the wholesaler whole situation, and balancing between generics and brands and the drug adherence. And I mean, geez, oh man, the list goes on and on. But one of the facets of being a business owner is kind of something that a lot of us don't think about. I know I don't really think about it. And that is mitigating the risk of business loss and what that means to the slap in the face of reality if anything major ever happens. If we ever have a data breach into our pharmacy management system, if we ever have a slip and a fall and somebody tries to sue us, that whole world of insurance seems extremely boring in some ways and tedious to me, but my Lord, is it important. So tell us about, how do you, as a pharmacy owner, from your perspective, how do you choose to manage that? Is that something that you're looking at quarterly, yearly, annually? Like, what are you doing to mitigate risk now that you are 6 pharmacies, large and growing?
Well, it's something that you really, I think, gets kind of put aside until you really need to focus on it in a more overall cost perspective. We had an issue come up where we were evaluating our different costs across the board, and that happened to be one of the larger areas of expense. And so we look at it on a yearly basis when our policies are coming up for expiration to see not only what our overall cost is, but what we are being covered for. So we try to do it on an annual basis if possible.
So tell us about your provider and why you kind of chose who you did. And also talk to me about that digital element. How are you guys mitigating the risk of data breaches?
Well, we had met with Heffernan on at least 2 years before we even switched. We missed our window to change over on a couple of different occasions, but last year we were a little bit more proactive in getting our information to them, looking at our loss runs and getting it to them early so we could get quotes before our expirations of our policies. And what came about was we were able to save a considerable amount of money and get some consolidation of policies, which gave us, our policies are expiring at the same time now. We got our auto coverage for our delivery vehicles covered under the same plan. Plus, we've got some other things that may have been missing from our previous coverage. And, it also gives us some security from that digital aspect that seems to be pretty prevalent in the news these days about breaches and other types of data compromised information, compromising data in-house that we have coverage for and that we may not have had under previous policies.
So what I wonder about also is, with the evolution of your business, I'm thinking that you don't insure your pharmacy business the same way today that you did 10 years, 15, 20 years ago. What other things are changing in the world of pharmacy ownership and managing pharmacies, especially multiple with employees and with the increase of your customer traffic and parking lot issues? Like, what other things are happening in that sector of running your business that has changed over the years?
I think that the technology aspect plays a big role in what we do today, at least in our pharmacies. We have different types of automation, which it's a fairly large expense that we want to make sure that we do have some coverage if we do have an accident that would damage them. That's been a big portion of why we've made some changes on our policy. Making sure that it's not very often that you have to use those policies for coverage, but if you do, we want to make sure that it's covering specific areas. Immunizations, if we don't do a huge amount of compounding, but for what we do, we want to make sure that the coverage applies to those particular areas that may not be something we do on an everyday basis, but if we do happen to use that particular portion of the policy, we want to make sure we've got things in place to cover us. So,
how does employees kind of govern what happens from a coverage perspective? When I think of insurance on the healthcare side, I know that small businesses up to, I think it's the 49th employee or the 50th employee, somewhere around there, that you need to change specific coverages for actually benefits, that is. But the business side, the business coverage, is that the same way, Kyle? Do things change as you're growing as an employer?
As you add more employees, more stores, you bring on more property, you've got more people in the field that you need coverage for. Yes, it does change. And that's something when we bring on a new employer, we add a new location, and we make sure that we get with with Heffernan to make sure that we have the right policy in place to cover if it's a rental property, what kind of coverage do we need to cover for incidentals that may happen that are associated with that rental property, or if it's a property that we happen to own, what do we need to have in place to make sure that we're covered if there's an accident on site from either employee or through either a client that maybe had an accident on our property, and how, what our coverage would extend to cover those particular situations.
And when you say particular situations, Kyle, sometimes those situations are specific to pharmacy compared to someone who owns a local hardware store or a bowling alley or, a grocery store. So why is it important to work with your organization, Heffernan? What stands out about them with regards to pharmacy ownership and running pharmacies?
They have been very helpful in pointing out some particular areas that may not be commonplace, or at least commonplace in past years, but are coming more prevalent. I know immunizations from a pharmacy standpoint have been fairly new compared to the history of where pharmacy's at. So they do question what you're doing and what types, so you make sure you have the right coverage. They do run through questionnaires to make sure that if you are doing compounding, how much you're doing, at what level, so they can make sure you have the right coverage to cover you for any incidents that may come along associated with those particular areas. So they ask you the right questions to give you the right coverage, and then they act on your responses in a quick manner, which gives you the ability to make good decisions for your business.
Kyle, it's like we're not sitting around thinking about it. You certainly don't, talk about it with friends and family because, my Lord, you don't want to bore your guests to death talking about these tedious business things, but down deep inside, it's so important. And the evaluation of a growing and or changing, maybe downgrading, maybe it's not growth, maybe it's downgrading. Maybe your pharmacy went from 8 pharmacies to 2 pharmacies. But I'd say it's time to look into it. So if you are listening, there's a guy that Kyle and I both know very well, Mr. Stephen Boone. Steve Boone is the assistant vice president at Heffernan Insurance Brokers, and they focus specifically on the business of pharmacy and owning pharmacies. So I'm going to put in the show notes Steve's contact information, but you can call him directly at 314-303-8751. That's 314-303-8751. Kyle, what other things are challenging you right now? We can talk to this entire audience of 68,000 plus listeners that as a pharmacy owner, you'd actually like to take the opportunity to share with everybody. What other things are we experiencing as a community pharmacy, independently owned pharmacy out there that people should hear about, either from advocacy perspective or something that you'd like to take action on? But this is your time. You're the guest on the show here. I'd like to turn it over to you.
Well, one thing that I can point out from being an Arkansas pharmacist is from the advocacy standpoint. We definitely had some challenges here, and since January 1st, and our association and our community of pharmacists and pharmacy providers in this state rallied to get legislation passed that was specifically targeting the PBM side of the equation. So we are very happy, and my challenge is to all the listeners and to all the pharmacists in other states, which I know we're getting some traction on, but to continue to push for regulations of PBM, so we can just get a level playing field going forward, and in the end be able to service our patients to what they deserve. So I'm just challenging everyone to continue to fight for legislation so we can level this playing field.
What incredible news out of the great state of Arkansas to lead the entire nation with regards to the House and Senate passing legislation to rein in those PBMs and become more transparent, give us an even playing field in running a business and running a healthcare business where many of our patients live far away from, cities, and sometimes our pharmacies are the only ones they have. The Senate Bill 2 passed on the floor 30-2 with obviously huge amounts of support. Exciting to see where this is going to be. I think it's called SB2 and HB 1010. But this is, I think, Kyle, it's going to lead the way for other states to follow. So it's exciting that you guys kind of led the way, but I completely agree with you on advocacy. And if you are listening, I'm going to put some show notes about this bill, as well as the Pharmacy Association of Arkansas. And anything in closing, Kyle, that you want to share with us?
Just, I'm happy to be a part of the pharmacy community. I appreciate everyone that listens to this show and other pharmacists that they've chosen a great profession, and let's continue push for our profession and provider status and other advocacy areas that we can continue on serving our patients.
Thanks so much, Kyle, for being a guest talking with Heffernan, who's a supporter of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. We thank you, Mr. Steve Boone, and what you're doing for our pharmacists. Once again, please reach out to Steve and let him know that you heard Kyle and I talking about the business of pharmacy, and get an evaluation done of your pharmacy business. Kyle, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're listening to the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I'm your host and founder, Todd Urey. We were on with Southern Pharmacy owner and entrepreneur, Mr. Kyle Lomax. We wish him the best of luck, and we thank you for listening to the Pharmacy Podcast.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Pharmacy Podcast Show. Be sure to subscribe to the show and send us a voice message with your ideas and comments from our contact section on the website. Did you know we develop digital health content to assist with business development and marketing efforts? Learn how we can help you drive more patients, physicians, and targeted leads to your website. Contact us today at pharmacypodcast.com.